Hermann Göring thought America was a joke. When U.S. officials told him in 1940 that they planned to build 50,000 planes a year, he laughed. The man in charge of the Luftwaffe, the Nazi Air Force, didn't just think it was unlikely, he believed it was impossible. To Göring and the Nazi High Command, the idea that a so-called soft democracy could outproduce the Reich in the art of war was laughable. They saw the U.S. as racially mixed, bureaucratically slow, and economically chaotic. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. To them, democracy meant weakness. Consensus meant failure. Diversity meant dysfunction. What they didn't realize, what they refused to realize, is that they weren't dealing with the joke. They were dealing with an industrial juggernaut. In 1940, America had produced just 3,611 military aircraft. That number would climb to nearly 100,000 per year by 1944. By the end of the war, the U.S. had churned out more aircraft than Germany could even dream of, outproducing the entire German war machine. Göring's smug grin didn't last long. What changed? Everything. It started with a decision. The U.S. wasn't even in the war yet when President Roosevelt declared that the country needed to become the arsenal of democracy. But that wasn't just a slogan, it was a mandate. Business leaders, engineers, and workers were told, this isn't about politics anymore. This is survival. And when Roosevelt appointed William Knudsen, an executive from General Motors who knew how to build at scale, to spearhead the transformation, things moved fast. Knudsen left his $1 million salary behind for a token $1 per year. That was the level of commitment. And under his guidance, America flipped the switch from consumer goods to combat gear almost overnight. What Nazi Germany didn't understand, and what would cost them dearly, is that America's democracy wasn't a weakness. It was the ultimate production engine. Factories that once made cars were now pumping out bombers. The Willow Run plant in Michigan? It was rolling out one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. That's not hyperbole. That's historical fact. Assembly lines got longer, processes got faster, and everything became modular, designed for speed, for replication, for scale. And here's what really caught the Nazis off guard. Who was doing the building? By 1944, 310,000 women had entered the aircraft industry. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just a propaganda icon, she was a real person in every factory, welding, riveting, and building machines of war with ruthless efficiency. Black Americans, immigrants, teenagers, people who had been told they weren't capable of skilled labor, were now outproducing Hitler's war machine. Nazi Germany clung to a fantasy that only pure Aryan men could build an empire. The US proved that when you let everyone in, you build a much, much bigger one. And it wasn't just volume, it was innovation. America wasn't just cranking out more planes. They were cranking out better ones. The B-29 Super Fortress, one of the most advanced bombers of the war, was the result of modular design, interchangeable parts, and constant battlefield feedback. Engineers didn't wait around for perfection. They iterated fast, adapted on the fly, and kept pushing forward. Factories were synced with frontline data. If pilots said a certain part failed too often, it was fixed in the next production run. That's what a democratic, agile system could do. Adapt quickly, and improve constantly. Nazi Germany's top-down, inflexible command structure simply couldn't keep up. While Germany relied on slave labor in underground factories, America mobilized over 180,000 companies under the War Production Board. From steel to rubber to electronics, the entire industrial complex moved in coordinated rhythm. It was messy. It was chaotic. But it worked. And it worked faster. And the most bitter irony, Nazi intelligence knew this might happen. There were reports, accurate ones, that warned about America's industrial potential. Some German analysts tried to sound the alarm. The US had resources, manpower, and organizational genius on a scale the Reich couldn't match. But those reports were ignored. Why? Because they didn't fit the Nazi worldview. They couldn't accept that a diverse, free, an inferior society could actually outperform the so-called master race. That blind spot, the refusal to see reality, was a strategic catastrophe. Because while the Nazis were digging tunnels and using forced labor to keep their factories running under Allied bombs, America was using high-speed rail, aircraft transport, and supply chain coordination to deliver bombers, tanks, and supplies across oceans. And those planes weren't just for show. U.S. air power enabled massive bombing campaigns across Europe. It helped open new fronts, support invasions, and choke off German supply lines. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next. And you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Aircraft carriers and bombers allowed the U.S. to fight a global war. Germany, boxed in and overwhelmed, simply couldn't match the scale. All of it, every bit of it, came down to production. America's ability to build faster, better, and more was what won the war. Not just battlefield tactics, not just strategy, sheer industrial dominance. That's what crushed the Reich. By 1945, the numbers told the story. The U.S. had produced over 300,000 aircraft. Germany? Not even half that. Göring, who once mocked the 50,000 plane target, ended up watching America double that output. And it wasn't just about winning the war. It was about what that victory meant. Because it wasn't tyranny that won. It was democracy. It wasn't racial purity that succeeded. It was inclusion. The diverse, democratic, messy system that Göring laughed at had completely buried the Nazi dream under a mountain of machinery. Women proved they could outperform expectations. Minorities proved they could master precision engineering. Workers who had never touched a tool before became masters of wartime production. In the end, it wasn't just a military victory. It was a moral one. Democracy's great secret wasn't unity through fear, it was unity through purpose. Voluntary cooperation, mutual respect, a shared goal. Those things didn't slow the U.S. down, they supercharged it. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, drop a comment below. What surprised you the most? Don't forget to hit like, share this with someone who still thinks totalitarianism is efficient, and subscribe for more untold moments that changed history. Let's talk about what it actually looked like inside this industrial miracle. Step into one of those wartime factories in 1943. The roar of machinery is deafening. Sparks fly. Conveyor belts rattle non-stop. It smells like oil, wool, and sweat. And standing at the assembly lines, not just men, not just veterans of the auto industry, but thousands of women with bandanas tied tight, sleeves rolled up, eyes locked in. You'd see teenagers just out of high school learning how to drill rivets into aluminum fuselages. Mothers, secretaries, and former housekeepers retooling engine blocks like seasoned engineers. This wasn't just mass production. This was reinvention. America wasn't just cranking out hardware, they were proving something. They were showing that when you invite everyone to the table, you don't dilute excellence, you multiply it. And the numbers proved it. At its peak, American industry produced one plane every 5 minutes. Let that sink in. Every 5 minutes. You want to know what true scale looks like? The Ford Willow Run plant was the largest factory under a single roof in the world. 2.5 million square feet. A mile-long assembly line. A workforce of over 40,000 people, operating in shifts around the clock. And the result? One complete B-20 for Liberator every hour. Göring never had a chance. And speaking of the Luftwaffe, let's just pause on that humiliation for a second. In 1939, the Luftwaffe was a symbol of terror. Blitzkrieg wouldn't have worked without it. Precision bombing, close air support, airborne tactics, it was revolutionary. Germany started the war with air superiority, but they couldn't hold it. Because the air war isn't about shock, it's about stamina. And Germany's production couldn't keep up with their losses, especially not when American skies became flooded with faster, longer range, more durable aircraft. Bombers with fighter escorts that stretched all the way to Berlin. The P-51 Mustang, for example, was a game changer. And yes, it was American engineering, but it was also mass production that made it lethal. Germany couldn't afford to lose planes. America? They could replace an entire squadron before breakfast. Let's be clear, none of this happened by accident. It took vision, coordination, and leadership from every angle. Knudsen wasn't alone. Donald Nelson, head of the War Production Board, helped orchestrate the flow of raw materials. Henry J. Kaiser turned shipbuilding into a factory operation, launching Liberty ships in a matter of days. FDR set the tone from the top, and business leaders who had once competed in the free market came together like it was a synchronized ballet, albeit one with steel, fire, and round-the-clock shifts. By the time America was revving up, Germany had already occupied most of Europe. Their factories had years to prepare. But the Nazi leadership made a fatal miscalculation. They thought slave labor and forced compliance would outmatch a free society's output. Instead, they got bottlenecks, sabotage, low morale, and logistical chaos. Meanwhile, in the US, people were working overtime voluntarily. High school kids skipped prom to work the line. Families rationed, volunteered, trained, and hustled. Not under threat, not under compulsion, but because there was a shared purpose: defend freedom, crush fascism, and bring the boys home. And the results kept compounding. American aircraft production didn't just help the Allies, it enabled them. British pilots flew American-made Mustangs. Soviet forces received hundreds of thousands of US planes, trucks, and engines through the Lend-Lease program. The Pacific Theater? Entirely dependent on American naval and air power. It wasn't just a domestic achievement, it was a global support system, powered by American factories and the people inside them. Let's go back to Hermann Göring for a second. He didn't just laugh at the 50,000 plane number, he scoffed at it. Publicly, he told people that America was too soft, too disorganized, too racially impure to mount any kind of serious resistance. In his mind, the US was the land of jazz, movies, and skyscrapers, not war machines. He never understood what that actually meant. The arrogance wasn't just his, though. It was baked into the ideology. Nazi leaders fundamentally believed that democracies were weak, that pluralism meant decay, that racial hierarchy would deliver order and efficiency. But their entire system was brittle. Rigid hierarchies can't absorb shocks. Authoritarian systems don't tolerate dissent, even the kind that says, hey, maybe America can build 100,000 planes. And those who tried to warn Hitler, they were silenced, demoted, or ignored. America's factories could iterate weekly. Germany's were stuck in doctrine. Meanwhile, US production didn't just keep pace with the war, it outran it. Factories didn't wait for the front lines to send back updates, they planned ahead. Engineers pre-built components that could be swapped in mid-mission. Logistics teams developed one of the most sophisticated supply chains in world history, anticipating needs, backfilling losses, and adjusting to shifting battle plans. Every American plane carried not just firepower, but an ecosystem behind it. Spare parts, training manuals, maintenance crews, fuel systems, and communications tech. It wasn't just hardware, it was infrastructure. That's why the Germans couldn't keep up. They didn't just need more planes, they needed the entire system that came with them. And by the time they realized what that meant, they were rationing aluminum and burying factories underground to hide from the American sky. By 1945, the US was operating more than 300,000 planes. The production target Göring laughed at 5,000 per year had been doubled. The Luftwaffe, once invincible, was now a scattered shell of its former self. The lesson? Never underestimate a democratic society under pressure. Because when you give people freedom and purpose, they don't just meet expectations, they shatter them. When you let people bring their full selves to the table, whether they're men or women, black or white, immigrants or born and bred, they will do the impossible. Not through command, but through commitment. And here's the part that sticks. The war ended, but the blueprint didn't. The systems created during we became the foundation of modern industrial America. The ideas of mass coordination, inclusive workforces, rapid prototyping, and logistics. They didn't fade, they evolved. And today, they still define what it means to build at scale, respond to crisis, and outlast your enemies. Because, in the end, it wasn't Göring's strategy that won. It wasn't Hitler's vision. It wasn't fear or propaganda. It was 100,000 planes, built by free people, in free factories, driven by belief, not obedience. You know what makes this whole thing even more unbelievable? It wasn't just the speed or the scale, it was that none of it was guaranteed. This wasn't destiny, it was a gamble. When Roosevelt announced those wild production goals, people inside the US thought he was out of his mind. 50,000 planes a year? That was science fiction. Even some military leaders doubted it could be done. America wasn't at war yet, and there were still isolationists in Congress arguing about neutrality. Factories were still making toasters. Automakers were selling convertibles. The US was not a wartime economy, it was a peacetime consumer market. And yet, when the signal came, the switch flipped. Auto plants stopped making cars. Radio manufacturers started wiring bombers. Toy companies made compasses. Typewriter factories churned out machine gun parts. It wasn't elegant, it was insane. But it worked. Because people understood. This wasn't just a war across the ocean. It was a fight for the future. And let's talk about who stepped up, because it wasn't just seasoned engineers or top-tier managers. It was secretaries, students, mechanics, janitors, and clerks. People who had zero experience with aircraft learned to read blueprints, weld frames, and install avionics. In weeks, the learning curve was vertical, but so was the motivation. This was bigger than patriotism. It was personal. Every worker had someone overseas. A son, a brother, a husband, a friend. So every bolt mattered. Every hour counted. And there was a sense of urgency that no totalitarian regime could fake. You can't force someone to care that deeply. You can only inspire it. Meanwhile, back in Germany, the cracks were showing. While America was training and integrating workers, Germany was doubling down on forced labor. Millions of prisoners and enslaved civilians were pushed into dangerous, brutal conditions. And here's the brutal irony: productivity collapsed. People don't do their best work under a whip. And the Nazi system, so obsessed with control, order, and racial purity, crippled itself from the inside. Engineers were censored. Feedback loops were ignored. Innovation was stifled. And slave laborers, with no reason to help their captors, sabotaged the machines they were building. The Nazi war machine wasn't just immoral, it was inefficient. And that inefficiency grew more deadly by the day. By 1944, the US wasn't just ahead, it was untouchable. American factories were building better planes faster than Germany could shoot them down. For every bomber lost, another 5 took its place. Fighter squadrons were operating with more planes than entire Luftwaffe divisions. And it showed. The Allies began bombing German targets relentlessly: factories, fuel plants, rail lines. Every bombing run was powered by American-made aircraft, flown by Allied pilots, maintained with parts stamped out in Detroit, Buffalo, Chicago. Göring's beloved Luftwaffe was stuck in a losing cycle: fewer planes, fewer pilots, and no time to recover. He had underestimated more than production. He had underestimated resilience. Because America wasn't just flexing economic power, it was unleashing a national identity built on adaptability, on moving fast, on working together under pressure. The diversity that Göring mocked turned out to be the greatest strength of all. But when it comes time to build, to rally, to win, that democracy will bury you in bombers. If you're still here, you're one of the real ones. Let me know in the comments what part of this massive production push blew your mind the most. Like the video if you learned something new, and hit subscribe if you want more stories that expose the myths, the moments, and the meltdowns that shaped history.